I came home after getting fired, walked into our bedroom, and found my fiancé's lover naked on our bed while she was in the shower. He said, "Bro, just don't hit me." But I didn't stop myself. The elevator doors opened on the 14th floor at 2 in the afternoon, which was exactly 5 hours earlier than I usually came home on a Tuesday. My cardboard box of desk belongings felt heavier with each step down the hallway toward apartment 1407. Inside were 3 years of corporate achievements that my former boss Gerald had watched me pack while security stood at the door. The conversation had lasted 8 minutes. Something about unauthorized data access and immediate termination, and legal would be in touch. I had tried to explain that I never accessed anything unauthorized, that my credentials showed normal usage patterns, that someone must have made an error. Gerald just kept shaking his head and pointing at the security footage timestamps that showed my badge accessing the server room at 3 in the morning on dates when I was provably asleep at home. The key turned in the lock with its familiar click. I pushed the door open and immediately noticed the second pair of shoes by the entrance. Men's dress shoes, expensive Italian leather, size 11 or 12. Not mine. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of running water from the bathroom. The shower. Samantha was home early too, apparently. I set the cardboard box down on the kitchen counter and walked toward our bedroom with my heart doing strange gymnastics inside my chest. The bedroom door was open. A man was sitting on the edge of our bed, completely naked, scrolling through his phone like he was waiting for a bus. He had dark hair and the kind of gym-built physique that came from consistent effort and probably a personal trainer. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and his face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, then recognition, then something that looked almost like resignation. He stood up quickly and raised both hands in a placating gesture. His phone clattered onto the hardwood floor. The man spoke first, and his voice had a strange quality to it, like he was reading from a script he had memorized poorly. "Bro, just don't hit me. I can explain everything. This isn't what it looks like. I know you're angry, but if you just listen for 1 second I can make this make sense. The thing about rage is that it does not arrive like people describe in books. There was no red mist or tunnel vision or feeling of heat. Instead, everything became very sharp and clear and cold. I could see individual water droplets on the bathroom door. I could hear the specific pitch of the shower changing as Samantha moved under the stream. I could smell the cologne this stranger was wearing, something woody and expensive. My hands were steady when I grabbed the nearest object, which happened to be the decorative wooden vase Samantha's mother had given us as an engagement present. The man saw what I was holding and took 3 quick steps backward until he hit the window. His hands were still up. The words came faster now. "Please, Vincent, just listen. I'm not actually sleeping with her. This is part of something bigger. I need you to trust me for exactly 2 minutes." He knew my name. That made it worse somehow. I moved toward him, and he sidestepped away from the window, putting the bed between us. The vase felt solid in my grip. The man kept talking, but the words stopped making sense as individual units. They became just noise. I circled the bed one way, and he circled the opposite direction. We probably looked like children playing tag. Then he made a mistake and glanced toward the bedroom door, checking if he could make a run for it. And in that half-second of distraction, I threw the vase. My aim was terrible. The vase sailed past his head by at least a foot and shattered against the wall behind him, exploding into dozens of wooden fragments. The man flinched anyway and lost his balance, stumbling sideways into the dresser. The collision knocked over several picture frames. Our engagement photo hit the floor face down. The shower shut off. Samantha's voice called out from the bathroom, asking if everything was okay out there, saying she thought she heard something break. The naked man looked at me with an expression I could not categorize. It was not fear exactly, though there was some of that. It was more like frustration mixed with something that resembled pity. He grabbed his pants from where they were draped over the chair in the corner and started pulling them on with quick, efficient movements. Samantha emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel with her wet hair plastered to her shoulders. She saw me first, then saw the naked from the waist up stranger holding his shirt, then saw the destroyed vase scattered across the carpet. Her face did something complicated. She opened her mouth and closed it and opened it again. Finally, she managed to form words. She said that she was sorry I had to find out this way. She said she had been planning to tell me eventually. She said the timing was terrible and she knew this looked bad, but I had to understand that what she had with Wesley was real, and what she had with me had stopped being real about 8 months ago. She said she still cared about me as a person. She said we could talk about dividing the apartment lease and the shared bank account like adults. Wesley pulled his shirt on and started buttoning it. He had stopped looking at me and was instead watching Samantha with an intensity that seemed strange given the circumstances. His jaw was tight. Samantha kept talking about how these things happened and how nobody was the villain here and how she hoped we could eventually be civil for the sake of our mutual friends. I walked out of the bedroom. They both stopped talking. I went to the kitchen and picked up my phone and called my brother Kenneth, who answered on the third ring. I told him I needed him to come over right now and bring his truck because I was removing some people and their belongings from my apartment. Kenneth said he would be there in 20 minutes. His voice had a quality that suggested he was not going to ask questions until later. When I returned to the bedroom, Samantha had changed into clothes, and Wesley was fully dressed, including shoes. They both looked ready to leave. I told them they had 20 minutes to gather whatever they wanted to take, and then they needed to be gone. Samantha started to say something about her rights as a leaseholder, but I reminded her that only my name was on the lease because she had insisted her credit was better saved for the house we were supposedly going to buy together next year. Wesley spoke for the second time since Samantha had emerged from the bathroom. He said that he had parked in the driveway and was blocking my car. He said he would move it as soon as he grabbed his keys from the kitchen counter. He walked past me without making eye contact. I followed him to the kitchen. His keys were sitting next to my cardboard box of desk belongings. He picked them up and then paused, looking at the box. He asked if I had been fired today. I told him it was none of his business. He said it was absolutely my business, and that I should check his car before he moved it. He said specifically to check the trunk and to look under the spare tire compartment. Then he handed me his keys. Samantha appeared in the hallway with an overnight bag. She was crying now, which seemed performative given that she had just explained how she had stopped loving me 8 months ago. She asked Wesley what he was doing. Wesley told her to be quiet. His voice had changed completely. The pleading quality from earlier was gone. Now he sounded like someone giving orders. I looked down at the keys in my hand. They were attached to a keychain with a small metal badge that read FBI Academy Quantico 2019. Wesley met my eyes and spoke very carefully and deliberately. He said that I should go check the trunk of his car right now before anyone moved it or touched it. He said that after I checked the trunk, I should come back inside and lock the door and not let anyone leave, including him and including Samantha. He said that in approximately 8 minutes a woman named Agent Fiona Graves was going to arrive and that I should let her inside and show her what I found. He said if I did not do these things, then everything that had happened to me in the past 24 hours was going to get much worse. Then he turned to Samantha and told her she had the right to remain silent. I went downstairs with Wesley's keys clutched in my fist hard enough to leave impressions in my palm. The parking lot was mostly empty on a Tuesday afternoon. Wesley's car was a dark blue sedan with government plates that I had been too angry to notice when I walked past it earlier. The trunk popped open with an electronic beep. Inside was a spare tire, a first aid kit, a tire iron, and a black nylon duffel bag that looked military grade. I unzipped the duffel bag and found myself staring at approximately 300 pages of documents, each marked with red stamps that said classified and do not distribute and for official use only. The first document was a surveillance log with Samantha's full name at the top. The dates went back 14 months. There were photos of her meeting with people I did not recognize in coffee shops and parking garages and hotel lobbies. There were transcripts of phone conversations. There were bank records showing deposits from shell corporations registered in countries I could barely pronounce. The second document was a personnel file for Samantha Chun, but not the Samantha Chun I thought I knew. This file said she was born in Beijing and immigrated at age 12 and had degrees from universities she had never mentioned and previous employment with companies that did not exist when I searched for them later. The third document had my name on it. It was an intelligence assessment dated 3 years ago, right before I met Samantha at that professional networking event that I had always assumed was coincidence. The assessment listed my security clearance level, my access to defense contractor databases, my role in managing encrypted communications for military logistics contracts, and my psychological profile, which apparently made me a suitable target for recruitment through relationship. There was a photo of me attached with a paperclip. Someone had written in the margins that I had no living parents, one sibling with minimal contact, few close friends, and a pattern of intense commitment to romantic partners. The word approved was stamped across my face in red ink. I stood in the parking lot holding this document and understanding that my entire relationship with Samantha had been a strategic operation from the beginning. The networking event was not coincidence. The shared interest in hiking was manufactured. The engagement was a tactical milestone. Every intimate moment had been a transaction in a ledger I never knew existed. A silver SUV pulled into the parking lot and stopped next to Wesley's sedan. A woman in a dark pantsuit got out and showed me a badge identifying her as Special Agent Fiona Graves with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She had short gray hair and the kind of face that suggested she had seen terrible things and stopped being surprised by them decades ago. She looked at the open trunk and the documents in my hand and asked if I was Vincent. I confirmed that I was. She asked if Wesley and Samantha were still upstairs. I told her they were. She closed the trunk, took the documents from my hand with a gentleness that seemed incongruous with the situation, and gestured toward the building entrance. We rode the elevator in silence. Agent Graves spent the time reviewing the documents I had been holding, flipping through pages with the practiced speed of someone who read classified materials the way normal people read grocery lists. When we reached the 14th floor, she walked slightly ahead of me down the hallway and knocked on my apartment door with the specific rhythm of someone who had arranged this signal in advance. Wesley opened the door. He was still dressed, but had added a jacket. Samantha was sitting on the couch with her overnight bag at her feet, looking pale and smaller than I remembered. Kenneth had apparently not arrived yet, which meant less than 20 minutes had passed since I called him, though it felt like hours. Agent Graves entered the apartment and told Wesley he had made a complete disaster of the operation. Wesley said that the operation was already a disaster and he had made the best decision available given the circumstances. Agent Graves asked why he had deviated from the surveillance-only protocol. Wesley said that Vincent was collateral damage in an espionage investigation and deserved to know he was about to be indicted for crimes he did not commit unless someone intervened immediately. I interrupted and asked what they were talking about. Agent Graves sighed and sat down in the armchair across from Samantha. She explained that the FBI had been investigating Samantha for 11 months. The investigation began when a routine counterintelligence audit flagged unusual data access patterns at my company. The patterns suggested someone with legitimate credentials was copying classified defense logistics information and transmitting it to foreign servers. The digital forensics pointed to my account credentials. My company reported it to federal authorities. The FBI began monitoring and discovered that someone was using cloned credentials that matched my authentication signatures perfectly. Further investigation revealed Samantha had been photographed meeting with a known intelligence operative from a foreign network that specialized in economic and military espionage. The FBI obtained warrants to monitor her communications and discovered she had been systematically stealing information from my laptop while I slept, using a hardware keylogger attached to my keyboard and a modified USB drive that cloned my security credentials. She had been selling access to defense contractor databases for 18 months. The information had been used to compromise supply chain security for military operations in 3 countries. Wesley had been assigned to get close to Samantha and document her activities. The affair was fabricated. They had staged encounters at locations Samantha frequented, manufactured a attraction narrative, and Wesley had played the role of interested suitor. Samantha had pursued the relationship because she believed Wesley worked in private military contracting and had access to additional valuable networks. Wesley had been feeding her useless information while documenting every transaction she made with her handlers. The plan had been to arrest Samantha and her network contacts simultaneously in a coordinated operation scheduled for next week. Then I got fired this morning. Wesley received an alert about my termination and realized that my company was moving faster than the FBI had anticipated. If I was fired for the data breaches that Samantha committed, I would likely be arrested within days. Wesley made the decision to accelerate everything by forcing a confrontation that would get me to discover the evidence in his trunk. Agent Graves was not happy about this decision because it meant Samantha now knew she was under investigation and the larger network might scatter before they could be apprehended. Wesley argued that letting an innocent person go to federal prison for espionage was not an acceptable cost for a cleaner operation. Samantha had been silent during this entire explanation. Now she spoke, and her voice was different from any voice I had heard her use before. She said that Agent Graves needed to be careful about how much she revealed because there were aspects of this situation that the FBI did not fully understand. Agent Graves told her to stop talking. Samantha ignored this and said that if the FBI had actually been monitoring her communications as thoroughly as claimed, they would have noticed the encrypted messages she had been receiving from someone inside the investigation itself. Wesley and Agent Graves both went very still. Samantha continued talking. She said that she had known Wesley was FBI for the past 6 weeks. She said that someone had warned her and told her to continue the relationship and feed Wesley false information about her network contacts. She said the person who warned her had access to FBI operational details and surveillance schedules. She looked directly at Agent Graves when she said this. Agent Graves stood up smoothly and told Wesley to secure the suspect. Wesley moved toward Samantha, but Agent Graves pulled a weapon from her jacket and pointed it at Wesley instead of at Samantha. She apologized to Wesley and said that she had tried to manage this situation cleanly, but too many variables had collapsed simultaneously. She told me to sit down on the floor with my hands visible. Her voice was calm and professional. She explained that she had been working with Samantha's network for 3 years, providing advance warning of counterintelligence operations in exchange for deposits in offshore accounts that would fund a retirement substantially more comfortable than a federal pension. Wesley asked why she was revealing this instead of just killing us and claiming we were all part of the espionage network. Agent Graves said that she was not a murderer and that there were cleaner ways to handle the situation. She had already sent messages to her contacts in the network explaining that the operation was compromised and providing them with the FBI surveillance data they needed to disappear. She had also prepared documentation that would make it appear that Wesley had been the compromised agent and that she had discovered his betrayal. She would arrest Wesley and Samantha together, claim they were working in partnership, and use the confusion to bury the investigation in bureaucratic complexity while the real network scattered internationally. My phone buzzed. It was Kenneth texting that he was downstairs. Agent Graves told me not to answer it. She asked for my phone. I handed it to her. She turned it off and put it in her pocket. Then she told Wesley to put his weapon on the coffee table and step away from it. Wesley complied slowly. His face showed a calculation happening behind his eyes. Samantha stood up from the couch. She told Agent Graves that the plan would not work because there was additional evidence that Graves did not know about. Graves asked what evidence. Samantha said that Vincent's father had been investigating the same network 5 years ago before his death. She said that Vincent's father had hidden extensive documentation of the network's operations and that she had spent 3 years trying to find it without success. She said that if Graves arrested everyone now, eventually someone would locate that documentation and the entire conspiracy would unravel. I had stopped processing information in any organized way. My father had died in a car accident 5 years ago. Single vehicle collision on a mountain road in bad weather. I had been told it was instantaneous. I had been told he did not suffer. Now Samantha was saying it was murder and that my father had been investigating the same people who had sent her to infiltrate my life. Agent Graves asked Samantha where the documentation was hidden. Samantha said she did not know, but that Vincent probably knew without realizing it. Graves turned to me and asked if my father had given me anything before he died. Storage unit keys, safety deposit boxes, insurance policies with unusual beneficiaries, anything that seemed odd at the time. I told her that my father had given me a key 2 weeks before he died. He had said it was for emergencies and that I should keep it somewhere safe and not tell anyone about it. The key had a number stamped on it, but no other identifying information. I had put it in my desk drawer and forgotten about it because 2 weeks later he was dead and I was dealing with funeral arrangements and estate paperwork and grief. Agent Graves asked where the key was now. I said it was in the desk in my home office. She told me to retrieve it. Wesley said that I should not cooperate with someone who had just admitted to treason. Agent Graves reminded him that she was the one holding the weapon and making the decisions. She followed me to the office and watched while I opened the desk drawer and found the key exactly where I had left it 5 years ago. The key had the number 2847 stamped into the metal. Agent Graves took a photo of it with her phone. Then she made a mistake. She turned slightly to send the photo to someone, and Wesley tackled her from behind. They crashed into the bookshelf together. The weapon discharged into the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down. Wesley and Graves fought for control of the weapon with the ugly desperation of 2 professionals who knew exactly how much was at stake. I grabbed the heavy glass paperweight from the desk and brought it down on Graves' wrist. She screamed and dropped the weapon. Wesley kicked it across the room and pinned Graves to the floor with his knee on her back. He was breathing hard. There was blood on his shirt, but I could not tell whose. Samantha ran. I heard the apartment door open and slam shut. Wesley yelled at me to go after her. I grabbed the weapon from where it had slid under the couch and ran into the hallway. Samantha was at the elevator stabbing the button repeatedly. When she saw me, she abandoned the elevator and ran for the stairwell instead. I followed her down 4 flights of stairs. She was faster than I expected. By the time I reached the parking lot, she was already at her car. Kenneth was standing next to his truck, looking confused. Samantha got her car started and reversed out of the parking space fast enough to scrape the bumper of the car behind her. Then she accelerated toward the parking lot exit. Kenneth's truck was blocking the exit. Samantha laid on the horn. Kenneth did not move because he did not understand what was happening. Samantha put her car in park, got out, and ran toward the street on foot. I chased her for 2 blocks before my lungs gave out, and I had to stop. She disappeared around a corner and was gone. I walked back to the apartment building with my lungs burning and my hands shaking from adrenaline that had nowhere to go. Kenneth was standing in the parking lot holding his phone and looking like he was trying to decide whether to call the police or an ambulance or possibly a priest. I told him that everything was complicated and that I would explain later, but right now I needed him to help me with something upstairs. Kenneth looked at the weapon I was still holding and asked if I had killed anyone. I told him no. He seemed only moderately reassured by this. Wesley had secured Agent Graves with zip ties that he apparently kept in his jacket pocket for professional purposes. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her hands bound behind her. Blood was running from her nose, and she was breathing in short, angry huffs. Wesley was on his phone speaking in the clipped, efficient language of someone reporting a crisis to superiors who would not be happy about it. He ended the call and told me that a tactical team was en route, but would take at least 40 minutes to arrive because they were dispatching from the regional office. He said that Samantha would likely go to ground at one of several predetermined safe locations that the network maintained for exactly this kind of emergency. He said the chances of finding her before she left the country were shrinking with each passing minute. Then he asked if I still had the key my father gave me. I showed him the key with 2,847 stamped on it. Wesley took a photo and sent it to someone. He explained that the number was likely a storage unit identifier and that his team would cross-reference storage facilities in the area where my father lived and worked. He said that if my father had been investigating the network seriously enough to get killed for it, then whatever he had hidden was probably comprehensive enough to dismantle their entire operation. Agent Graves laughed. It was an ugly sound. She said that Wesley was an optimistic fool if he thought dismantling one network would accomplish anything meaningful. She said that for every network the FBI discovered and shut down, 3 more were operating in jurisdictions the FBI could not touch. She said the Foreign Intelligence Services had been infiltrating defense contractors and government agencies for decades with a success rate that would horrify the American public if they knew the actual numbers. Wesley told her to shut up. Graves ignored him and looked directly at me instead. She said that my father had been a minor problem that was solved with a minor solution. She said that Vincent Sr. had stumbled onto the network by accident while auditing security protocols for his employer and had spent 6 months compiling evidence before anyone noticed what he was doing. She said the network had tried to recruit him first, offering money and opportunities, but he had refused. She said his death was quick and professional and that I should take comfort in knowing he had not suffered beyond the initial impact. I asked if she had killed him personally. Graves said no. She said she had simply provided his travel schedule and vehicle information to people who specialized in making accidents look convincing. She said it was business and nothing personal, and that my father would have understood that if he had been more pragmatic about the realities of modern intelligence work. Kenneth asked what was happening in a tone that suggested he had lost the thread of events entirely and was beginning to suspect he was having a breakdown. Wesley gave him a 30-second summary that included the words espionage and FBI and murder and offshore accounts. Kenneth sat down on the couch heavily and said that he thought he needed a drink. I told him where the whiskey was. My phone rang in Agent Graves' pocket. She said that I should answer it because it was probably important. Wesley retrieved the phone and checked the screen. He said it was my former boss, Gerald. He asked if I wanted to take the call. I said yes. He put it on speaker. Gerald's voice came through with the careful tone of someone delivering bad news they had rehearsed. He said that he had just received a call from the FBI explaining that there had been a significant error in the investigation of the data breaches at our company. He said that new evidence indicated I was not responsible for the unauthorized access and that the actual perpetrator had been identified. He said the company was prepared to offer me full reinstatement with back pay and a formal apology. He said he hoped I would consider returning because I was a valuable employee, and this had all been an unfortunate misunderstanding. I told Gerald that I would think about it. He said to take all the time I needed. I ended the call. Wesley said that his superiors had moved quickly to start damage control. He said that clearing my name was the minimum they could do given that I had been targeted by a foreign intelligence operation and had nearly gone to prison for crimes committed against me. Agent Graves said that clearing my name would not change the fundamental problem. She said that the network had my father's documentation location now because Samantha had heard me tell Graves about the key. She said Samantha would relay that information to her handlers and they would find the storage unit before the FBI did. She said that even if the FBI arrested her, the evidence would disappear and the network would continue operating with minimal disruption. Wesley asked why she was telling us this. Graves said because she wanted to negotiate. She said that if Wesley let her go, she would provide the locations of 3 major network safe houses and the identities of 7 operatives currently working in defense contractor positions. She said this information was worth more than her arrest, and that Wesley should consider the cost-benefit analysis. Wesley said absolutely not. Graves shrugged as much as someone with their hands zip-tied could shrug. She said it was his career. I asked Wesley what would happen when the tactical team arrived. He said they would take Graves into custody and transport her to a federal detention facility. He said she would be charged with espionage, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and several other crimes that carried mandatory minimum sentences. He said she would spend the rest of her life in prison. He said this with the flat certainty of someone who had seen it happen before. Graves said that Wesley was wrong about the prison part. She said she had insurance. She said that if she were arrested, certain encrypted files would be automatically released to media outlets and congressional oversight committees. She said these files documented FBI operational failures, illegal surveillance activities, and cooperating relationships with foreign intelligence services that would create a political scandal large enough to gut the Bureau's funding and credibility for a generation. Wesley called her bluff. Graves recited a string of file names and encryption keys from memory. Wesley's face changed. He made another phone call and repeated the information Graves had provided. Someone on the other end said something that made Wesley close his eyes and press his fingers against his forehead. He ended the call and told Graves that she was even worse than he thought. Kenneth poured himself another drink. He asked if anyone else wanted one. Everyone declined. He drank it alone. The door buzzed. Wesley checked the security camera feed on his phone and saw 6 federal agents in tactical gear standing in the hallway. He opened the door, and they filed in with the practiced efficiency of people who did this regularly. They secured Agent Graves and performed a sweep of the apartment. The team leader spoke briefly with Wesley in the kitchen, using voices too quiet for me to hear. Then they took Graves away. She did not say anything as they let her out. She just looked at me with an expression I could not interpret. After they left, Wesley sat down on the couch next to Kenneth and accepted the drink he had declined earlier. He looked exhausted. I asked him what the team leader had said. Wesley explained that the FBI had located 3 storage facilities near where my father worked that used 4-digit unit numbers in the 2,800 range. They were dispatching teams to check all 3 simultaneously. He said we would know within the hour whether my father's documentation still existed. I asked what happened if the network got there first. Wesley said then we would have nothing and the investigation would collapse and Samantha and her handlers would disappear into countries without extradition treaties, and Agent Graves would probably negotiate some kind of reduced sentence in exchange for her insurance files. He said it would be a comprehensive failure on every level. Kenneth asked if this kind of thing happened often in Wesley's line of work. Wesley said more often than anyone wanted to admit. Kenneth said that seemed stressful. Wesley agreed that it was. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I did not recognize. Wesley told me not to answer it. I answered it anyway. Samantha's voice came through. She said that she was calling because she wanted to make something clear before this situation deteriorated further. She said that everything she had told me about loving me was a lie, but that she did genuinely regret the necessity of the situation. She said I had been kind to her, and that under different circumstances, she might have actually developed real feelings. She said this like it was supposed to be comforting. I asked her where she was. She said somewhere safe. She asked if I had told the FBI about the key yet. I said yes. She said that was unfortunate because it meant we were now in a race. She said her people were very good at races. She said that my father had been smart to hide his documentation, but not smart enough to hide it somewhere truly inaccessible. I asked her why she was calling. She said because she wanted me to know that my father's death was not random and not an accident, and that he had died because he tried to do the right thing in a world where the right thing often got you killed. She said he had been investigating the network for 8 months before they noticed. She said he had compiled documentation on 17 operatives, 43 compromised companies, and 12 government officials who had accepted payments in exchange for access. She said it was genuinely impressive work for someone with no intelligence training. She said that my father had made one critical error. He had trusted someone. He had shown his documentation to a colleague who he believed was trustworthy. The colleague had immediately reported it to the network. They had killed my father within 72 hours. But they never found the documentation because my father had moved it after showing it to the colleague, and before the colleague could betray him. He had known something was wrong. He had hidden everything and then given me the key 2 weeks before his death. Samantha said that after my father died, the network spent months searching for his documentation without success. Eventually, they had decided that the best approach was patient infiltration. They researched my father's family and identified me as the most likely person to have received any final instructions or hidden items. They created a profile. They identified my weaknesses and interests. They designed Samantha Chun as the perfect partner for Vincent Hayes. They sent her to the networking event where we met. Everything after that was execution of a long-term strategy. She said it had taken 3 years of living with me and searching the apartment and monitoring my communications before she finally heard me mention the key to my brother Kenneth during a conversation about cleaning out old desk drawers last month. She had reported this to her handlers immediately. They had decided to wait until I used the key or revealed its purpose naturally. But then Wesley had compromised the operation and everything had accelerated. I asked her why she was telling me all this. She said because I deserved to know that my father had been a good man fighting against something much larger than himself. She said he had almost succeeded. She said his documentation could still dismantle significant portions of the network if it reached the right people. She said she hoped it did not because she liked being alive and free, but that she respected what he had tried to do. Then she said that her ride was arriving and she had to go. She said she hoped I rebuilt my life into something better than what she had destroyed. She ended the call. Wesley had been listening on speaker. He immediately made another call to his team and relayed everything Samantha had said. Someone told him something that made him stand up quickly. He told me that one of the storage facilities had just reported suspicious activity. 2 men in a van had cut the lock on Unit 2847 approximately 15 minutes ago. The facility manager had called the police. The FBI team was still 12 minutes away. We left Kenneth in the apartment and took Wesley's car. He drove with the kind of controlled speed that came from emergency training. The storage facility was on the industrial edge of town, a sprawling complex of orange metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing. We arrived to find 2 police cars parked near the entrance and officers talking to the facility manager. Wesley showed his credentials and explained the situation in terms that made the officers step back and let him take over. Unit 2847 was in the back corner of the complex. The door was open. The lock was on the ground. Inside the unit was empty except for file boxes stacked against the walls and a small fireproof safe in the corner. 2 men were loading boxes into a white van. When they saw us, they dropped what they were holding and ran. Wesley chased one. I chased the other. My target made it approximately 50 feet before tripping over a speed bump and falling hard enough to scrape the skin off both palms. I caught up to him and stood there breathing hard while he sat on the asphalt bleeding and cursing in a language I did not recognize. The police arrived and took him into custody. Wesley had tackled his target into the side of a storage unit. They were both on the ground when I got there. The FBI tactical team arrived moments later and took over the arrest. Wesley stood up slowly and checked his ribs where he had taken an elbow. He said he was getting too old for field work. One of the tactical team members said that Wesley had said that after the last 3 operations too. Wesley said maybe this time he meant it. The boxes from my father's storage unit filled an entire conference room at the FBI field office. I spent 6 hours going through them with Wesley and 3 analysts who documented every page. My father had been methodical to the point of obsession. He had organized everything by date and by operative and by compromised organization. There were bank records and flight manifests and photographs taken from long distances with telephoto lenses. There were recordings of conversations my father had captured using equipment he must have purchased specifically for the investigation. There were organizational charts showing how the network moved money and information across international boundaries. There were names of people in positions of authority who had accepted payments. There were contingency plans and communication protocols and safe house locations across 4 continents. The analysts kept stopping to stare at particular documents and then conferring with each other in low voices. Wesley explained that my father had compiled evidence that would normally take a multi-year investigation with significant resources. He said my father had done it alone in 8 months while working a full-time job and apparently without raising suspicion until the very end. He said it was the most comprehensive counterintelligence documentation he had seen from a civilian source. I found a letter addressed to me in the bottom of the last box. The envelope was sealed and had my name written on it in my father's handwriting. I opened it carefully. The letter was dated 1 week before he died. He wrote that if I was reading this, then something had happened to him, and that he was sorry for putting this burden on me. He wrote that he had discovered something that he could not ignore and could not report through normal channels because he did not know who could be trusted. He wrote that the key he had given me would lead to everything he had found. He wrote that I should give it to someone in federal law enforcement who seemed trustworthy and let them handle it from there. He wrote that he loved me and was proud of me and that I should live a good life and not let his choices define my future. He signed it with just his first name the way he always had on birthday cards. Wesley read the letter after I finished it. He said that my father had made the right choice by hiding the evidence and creating a clear trail for me to follow. He said it had probably saved both the investigation and my life. He asked if I was okay. I said I did not know yet. The FBI arrested 17 people over the next 72 hours based on my father's documentation. They raided 6 safe houses and seized financial records that implicated another 34 individuals in various supporting roles. Agent Graves was formally charged with espionage, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. Her insurance files turned out to be less damaging than she had threatened once the FBI's Internal Affairs Division had time to properly contextualize the information. She was denied bail and held in federal detention pending trial. Samantha was apprehended 4 days later trying to board a cargo ship in a shipping container that had been modified for human transport. She was with 3 other operatives who were also attempting to leave the country. All 4 were arrested and charged under the Espionage Act. The The shipping company cooperated fully with investigators and provided documentation showing the network had been using their vessels for smuggling purposes for at least 6 years. Wesley spent 2 weeks in meetings with federal prosecutors and intelligence oversight committees explaining how the investigation had been compromised and how the compromise had been discovered. He testified that my cooperation had been essential to recovering the documentation and that without it the network would have successfully escaped accountability. He recommended that I receive recognition for assisting a federal investigation under dangerous circumstances. I declined the recognition but accepted his recommendation that I speak to a therapist who specialized in processing traumatic events. My company offered me reinstatement with a promotion and a significant salary increase. I met with Gerald and told him that I appreciated the offer but could not return to an organization that had fired me based on circumstantial evidence without conducting a proper investigation. Gerald said he understood and offered me a consulting contract instead where I could work on security protocol reviews without being a full-time employee. I accepted that arrangement because it seemed like reasonable compensation for the damage done. Kenneth called me every day for 2 months to check if I was managing okay. I told him I was managing. He did not believe me, but stopped asking after I started actually managing. I sold the apartment because I could not live in a space where every room reminded me of manufactured intimacy and strategic deception. I moved to a smaller place across town with no memories attached to it. Wesley recovered from his injuries and returned to active duty. 3 months after everything ended, he called and asked if I wanted to get coffee. We met at a place downtown that neither of us had been to before. He told me he was considering retirement because the work was taking a toll he had not fully acknowledged until recently. He said he was thinking about private sector security consulting. He said he knew someone who was starting a firm and might need a partner with federal law enforcement experience. I had been thinking about starting a security consulting firm. I had been thinking about it since I realized that the systems meant to protect people and organizations from infiltration had failed comprehensively in my father's case and in mine. I told Wesley that I might know someone who was starting such a firm. He smiled and said that was a convenient coincidence. We started Hayes Security Solutions 6 weeks later. Our specialization was counterintelligence consultation for companies with defense contracts and government agencies that wanted independent security audits. Our first client was my former employer. Our fifth client was the FBI field office where Wesley had worked. By the end of the first year, we had 18 clients and had hired 4 additional consultants. Samantha's trial lasted 3 weeks. She was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Agent Graves received life in prison without possibility of parole. The 2 operatives caught at the storage facility both accepted plea deals and received reduced sentences in exchange for testimony against higher-ranking members of the network. The shipping company paid a substantial fine and agreed to implement new security protocols to prevent future smuggling operations. I testified at Samantha's trial. The prosecution asked me to describe our relationship and how she had infiltrated my life. I kept my answers factual and brief. Samantha watched me from the defense table with an expression I could not read. When I finished testifying, she asked her attorney if she could address me directly. The judge allowed it. She stood and said she wanted me to know that her final phone call to me had been sincere. She said she genuinely hoped I built something meaningful from the wreckage. Then she sat down and did not look at me again for the rest of the trial. I visit my father's grave once a month. I tell him about the consulting firm and the clients we help and the systems we improve. I tell him that his documentation dismantled a network that had operated for over a decade. I tell him that 17 operatives are in prison and that 34 others lost their positions and their access. I tell him that his work mattered and that he made the right choice even though it cost him everything. Wesley joined me at the grave on the anniversary of my father's death. He brought flowers and stood quietly while I spoke to a headstone. Afterward, he said that my father would have been proud of what we had built. I said I hoped that was true. Wesley said he was certain of it. The nightmares stopped after the first year. The hypervigilance about relationships faded after the second year. The ability to trust people began returning in small increments during the 3rd year. I started dating again, but kept the relationships casual and honest. I told people early about what had happened and let them decide whether they wanted to continue knowing that I came with complicated baggage. Most people appreciated the honesty. Some people could not handle it. Both responses were understandable. Life continued. The consulting firm grew. Wesley became my closest friend. Kenneth called less frequently because he could tell I was actually okay now. I learned to recognize the difference between reasonable caution and paranoia. I learned that what happened to me was not my fault and not something I could have prevented. I learned that my father died fighting something that mattered, and that the best way to honor him was to continue that fight in whatever way I could manage. 3 years after everything ended, the Department of Defense invited me to speak at a security conference about recognizing and preventing insider threats. I accepted. During the presentation, I told my story without using anyone's real names. I explained how sophisticated infiltration operations worked and how they exploited human psychology and organizational blind spots. I described the warning signs that people should watch for in their personal and professional lives. I provided recommendations for security protocols that could identify suspicious patterns before they resulted in catastrophic breaches. After the presentation, a woman approached me and said her brother had died in suspicious circumstances while investigating financial irregularities at his company. She asked if I would consult on her attempt to find out what really happened. I gave her my card. She called 3 days later. We took the case. We found evidence of embezzlement connected to a smaller criminal network. The people responsible were arrested. The woman thanked me and said I had given her family closure they had not thought possible. That became the pattern. We built security systems. We investigated suspicious circumstances. We helped people find answers when the official channels failed them. We honored my father's work by doing the work he had started. It was not the life I had planned. It was not the life Samantha had tried to manipulate me into living. It was something different and something mine. That felt like enough.